It's late at night, you're lying in bed with your phone a few inches from your face, telling yourself you'll sleep after one more video. Just one more. But somehow 40 minutes disappear without you noticing. Your thumb keeps scrolling automatically. Your eyes feel tired, your brain feels crowded, and even though you're exhausted, you can't stop. Then something strange happens. You pause for a second and look around the room. It's completely quiet. But inside your mind, it feels loud, restless, overstimulated, like your brain has forgotten how to be still. And in that moment, a thought quietly slips into your head. When was the last time I actually felt mentally clear? Not entertained, not distracted, not stimulated, clear. Because maybe you've started noticing it too. You pick up your phone without thinking and forget why you grabbed it in the first place. You switch between apps every few minutes. You struggle to focus on one task without checking something else. Even when you sit down to relax, your attention keeps pulling you in different directions. Conversations feel shorter, patience feels weaker, silence feels uncomfortable now. And the terrifying part is, this has become normal. Most people wake up and immediately consume, scroll, react, absorb noise before their minds even have a chance to breathe. Day after day, their attention gets pulled apart so gradually that they don't even realize what they're losing. Because the world is no longer competing for your money first, it's competing for your attention. Every notification, every algorithm, every headline, every endless stream of content. Something is always trying to keep your mind busy, distracted, emotionally reactive, and unable to sit still long enough to think deeply. And over time, something dangerous starts happening to a person when they live this way. They stop feeling present in their own life. They lose the ability to focus deeply. They lose the ability to enjoy simple moments. They lose the ability to hear themselves think, and eventually they lose connection with who they really are underneath all the noise. That's why so many people today feel mentally exhausted even when they've done nothing meaningful. They consume all day but feel empty at night. Their minds are overstimulated, but their lives feel emotionally undernourished. They have endless entertainment, but very little peace. And maybe that's where you are right now. Not lazy, not weak, just mentally overloaded for too long. The truth is, your attention shapes your reality more than almost anything else. What you repeatedly focus on becomes your emotional state, your habits, your mindset, your identity. A distracted mind slowly creates a distracted life, and the modern world knows that. Because distracted people are easier to influence, easier to control, easier to keep consuming. That's why your attention is constantly being pulled in every direction. Not by accident, but by design. But here's the good news. You can take it back. You can train your mind to focus again. You can become calm in a world addicted to noise. You can rebuild the ability to think clearly, live intentionally, and feel fully present again. And once you do, something powerful begins to happen. You stop reacting to life constantly and start taking control of it. That's what this audiobook is about. Not escaping the modern world, but learning how to protect your mind inside it. Because one day the people who can still focus deeply, think clearly, and remain calm in chaos will become the rarest people in the world. And over the next hour, you're going to learn how to become one of them. So before we begin, take a deep breath, put the distractions away for a little while. And if there's someone in your life who feels overwhelmed, mentally drained, constantly distracted or disconnected from themselves, share this video with them. It might help them find their way back to themselves again. Chapter 1. The Invisible War for Your Mind. A man sits in a coffee shop staring at his laptop while his phone lights up beside him every few minutes. He opens an email, then checks a notification, then scrolls for a second, then goes back to work, then checks another message, then another. An hour passes, and somehow almost nothing gets done. From the outside, it looks normal. Almost everybody lives this way now. Constant switching, constant stimulation, constant noise. But if you look closely, something deeper is happening beneath the surface. His attention is being fractured in real time. Not all at once. Little by little. Day after day. And eventually so is his life. Because most people think distraction is harmless. They think it's just a bad habit. A small weakness. A lack of discipline. But distraction is no longer just a personal problem anymore. It has become an environment, a culture, a business model. There are billion-dollar companies whose survival depends on keeping your mind overstimulated. Think about that for a second. Some of the smartest people on Earth wake up every day trying to answer one question. How do we keep human beings paying attention for longer? Not because it improves your life, but because your attention has become one of the most valuable resources in the world. Every notification is competing for your mind. Every headline is trying to trigger emotion. Every app wants to become a habit. And the more emotionally reactive you become, the more profitable you are. That's why outrage spreads faster than truth. That's why negativity gets more engagement than peace. That's why your mind feels restless even when nothing is wrong. The modern world is not designed for calm people. Calm people don't scroll endlessly. Calm people don't react impulsively. Calm people are harder to manipulate. A few years ago, one of my closest friends started noticing something strange about himself. He used to love reading. He could sit for hours focused on one thing. Long conversations, long walks, deep work, deep thought. But over time, something changed. One night we were sitting in his apartment while he tried to watch a movie. Within 20 minutes, he checked his phone 4 different times without even realizing it. Not because somebody important texted him. Not because there was an emergency. His brain simply could not tolerate stillness anymore. At one point, he paused the movie and laughed awkwardly. "I think my attention span is broken." He said it jokingly, but there was truth underneath it. Because what he was experiencing wasn't laziness. It wasn't stupidity. It wasn't weakness. His mind had simply been trained to expect stimulation every few seconds. And once your brain adapts to constant stimulation, normal life starts feeling too slow. Silence feels uncomfortable. Focus feels difficult. Reading feels exhausting. Even rest stops feeling restful because your nervous system no longer knows how to slow down. That's the part nobody talks about. Distraction doesn't just steal productivity, it steals your ability to fully experience life. You stop noticing small moments. You stop being present in conversations. You stop sitting with your own thoughts long enough to understand yourself. And eventually, your inner world becomes just as noisy as the outside one. A lot of people today are not physically tired. They're mentally overcrowded. Their attention has been pulled in so many directions that their minds never fully settle anymore. Even when they're alone, they don't feel alone. They feel surrounded by invisible noise. And because this lifestyle became normal, most people never question it. They assume feeling mentally scattered is just adulthood, but it's not. Human beings were not designed to absorb hundreds of emotional inputs every single day. News, opinions, notifications, videos, arguments, trends, fear, comparison, outrage, endless information with no silence in between. At some point, the brain stops processing. It starts surviving. And survival mode changes people. It makes them reactive, impatient, emotionally impulsive, unable to think deeply, unable to sit still, unable to hear themselves clearly. That's why some people can scroll for 3 hours straight and still feel unsatisfied afterward. Their minds are overstimulated but emotionally underfed. They consume more and more, yet feel less and less alive. Because attention works like water. Whatever you pour it into grows. If you constantly pour your attention into chaos, comparison, outrage, and noise, your inner world slowly begins to reflect those same things. But if you protect your attention, something else begins to happen. Your mind becomes clearer. Your emotions become calmer. Your thoughts become sharper. You begin feeling present again. And maybe the strangest part of all is this. Most people have forgotten what that feeling even feels like. Forgotten what it feels like to read without checking their phone. To sit quietly without reaching for stimulation. To think one thought all the way through without interruption. To fully exist in a moment without mentally escaping it. That's how deep this problem has become. The war for your attention is no longer just happening on your screen. It's happening inside your mind. And if you don't become aware of it, you slowly lose the ability to direct your own life intentionally. Because whatever controls your attention eventually controls your decisions, your habits, your emotional state, your future. Some people lose years this way without noticing, not because they were lazy, not because they lacked potential, but because their minds were constantly pulled away from what mattered most, one distraction at a time. And the frightening part is, the world will continue pulling at your attention forever. It will never stop on its own, which means eventually you have to make a decision. Will you keep giving your mind away to everything that demands it, or will you finally learn how to protect it? Chapter 2. Why your brain became addicted to noise. A few years ago, standing in line at a grocery store used to feel boring. People would look around. maybe think about their day, maybe stare out the window for a minute. There were small pockets of silence built into life, and strangely enough, those quiet moments gave the mind room to breathe. Now watch what happens the next time you stand in line somewhere. Almost everybody reaches for their phone within seconds, not because they need something important, not because they're in danger, because their brain has lost tolerance for stillness. The moment silence appears, the hand moves automatically. Scroll, tap, refresh, stimulate. And most people never stop long enough to ask themselves a dangerous question. What happens to a human mind that never experiences boredom anymore? Because boredom used to serve a purpose, it forced reflection, it created imagination, it gave people space to think deeply. But modern life eliminated almost every moment of natural stillness. Now the brain receives constant stimulation from morning until sleep. Notifications, music, videos, headlines, messages, opinions, entertainment every few seconds. And at first it feels harmless, even enjoyable. That's how addiction usually begins. Quietly. One of my old coworkers used to keep multiple screens open all day while working, a podcast playing in the background. Music in one ear, text messages constantly popping up, videos during lunch, social media between tasks. At one point he looked at me and said something that stayed with me for years. "I can't do anything without background noise anymore." He laughed after saying it, but there was exhaustion behind his smile, because what sounded normal was actually terrifying. His brain had become dependent on stimulation just to feel comfortable. And once the brain adapts to constant stimulation, ordinary life starts feeling emotionally flat. A slow conversation feels boring. A long walk feels empty. Reading feels difficult. Deep work feels painful. Silence feels unbearable. Not because these things lost value, but because the brain became overstimulated. That's the trap. Most people think they're choosing distraction, but eventually, distraction starts choosing for them. Their attention moves automatically. Their impulses become stronger than their intentions. They open apps unconsciously, check notifications without thinking, reach for stimulation before they even realize they're uncomfortable. And over time, the brain starts changing in ways people rarely notice at first. Patience shrinks, focus weakens, emotional control decreases, even happiness becomes harder to feel. Because the more dopamine the brain consumes constantly, the harder it becomes for normal life to feel rewarding. That's why some people can spend hours consuming content and still feel strangely empty afterward. Their mind stayed stimulated but never fulfilled. There's a difference, a huge difference. Modern stimulation gives the brain excitement without meaning, pleasure without peace, noise without satisfaction. And eventually, the nervous system starts living in a constant state of low-level restlessness. That's why so many people today feel anxious the moment things become quiet. Their minds are moving so fast internally that silence starts feeling uncomfortable. Not because silence is bad, but because silence exposes what distraction was covering. A man once told me he hadn't sat alone without music, television, or his phone in over 5 years. At first it sounded exaggerated, but then he explained something honestly that most people secretly understand. When things get quiet, my thoughts catch up to me. That's when I realize something important. For many people, distraction is no longer entertainment, it's emotional avoidance. People don't just scroll because they're bored. They scroll because stillness feels emotionally unfamiliar. The noise protects them from uncomfortable thoughts. Unresolved emotions, anxiety, loneliness, fear, regret, uncertainty. And when stimulation disappears, those things suddenly become visible again. That's why so many people panic without their phones nearby, not consciously, but emotionally. Their mind has been conditioned to escape discomfort immediately instead of sitting with it. This is what makes modern distraction different from the distractions of the past. It's no longer occasional. It's constant, portable, personalized, engineered specifically for your psychology. The algorithm learns what keeps you emotionally engaged and feeds you more of it, more outrage, more stimulation, more novelty, more emotional spikes. And eventually, your brain starts craving intensity all the time. That's why normal life can begin feeling strangely dull. A sunset can't compete with endless stimulation. A conversation can't compete with dopamine loops. Real life moves slower than the internet, and a brain addicted to speed struggles to appreciate slowness. But here's the twist most people never see coming. The real danger isn't just losing focus. It's losing your ability to feel fully alive in ordinary moments. Because some of the best parts of life happen quietly. A peaceful morning, a deep conversation, a walk at night, reading something meaningful, sitting alone with your thoughts, and finally understanding yourself better. But none of those moments can survive inside a constantly overstimulated mind. That's why people today consume more than ever while feeling less connected than ever, more entertained, less fulfilled, more stimulated, less alive. And slowly, without realizing it, they begin losing the ability to be present. Not because they're broken, because their brain adapted to an unnatural amount of noise. But the moment you understand this, something powerful begins to happen. You stop blaming yourself for struggling to focus, and you start realizing your mind has been trained to expect distraction constantly. That awareness changes everything. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you stop treating distraction like a harmless habit. You start seeing it for what it really is, a system that slowly disconnects human beings from themselves. And the frightening part is, most people will spend their entire lives overstimulated without ever realizing why they feel so mentally exhausted all the time. But you don't have to live that way. Because the mind can be retrained, attention can be rebuilt, and in the next chapter you're going to discover something most people never fully understand: why deep thinking itself is disappearing from modern life. Chapter 3. The Death of Deep Thinking. A man sits at dinner with his family while his phone rests face up beside his plate. Every few minutes the screen lights up. He glances down, just for a second. His daughter is talking about something that happened at school. His wife pauses halfway through a sentence because she can already feel his attention drifting somewhere else. Physically, he's still sitting at the table. Mentally, he's somewhere inside the noise. And what makes moments like this dangerous is how normal they've become. People are together now without really being together, listening without fully listening, living without fully paying attention. But the real loss goes deeper than conversation. The modern world is slowly destroying people's ability to think deeply. Not intelligence, not information, deep thought. There's a difference. Because deep thinking requires something modern life keeps interrupting: sustained attention. The ability to stay with one idea long enough to truly understand it. The ability to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. The ability to reflect instead of react. But today, most minds never stay still long enough for that process to happen. Thoughts get interrupted every few minutes. Silence gets replaced instantly. Reflection gets drowned in stimulation. And over time, people stop developing depth without even realizing it. They become mentally reactive instead of mentally clear. You can see it everywhere now. People read headlines instead of books, arguments instead of understanding, fast opinions instead of deep reflection. Everybody wants answers immediately, but very few people are willing to sit with difficult questions long enough to grow wiser from them, because wisdom grows slowly. And modern culture is addicted to speed. A few years ago, I worked with someone who constantly talked about wanting to change his life. He watched motivational videos every day, bought productivity books, listened to podcasts on discipline during his commute. He was always consuming information, but nothing in his life actually changed. At first, it didn't make sense. He clearly cared about self-improvement, but eventually I noticed something important. He never gave himself time to think deeply about anything he consumed. The moment one video ended, another started. The moment one podcast finished, music filled the silence. The moment boredom appeared, stimulation replaced it. His mind was full of information, but empty of reflection. And that's when I realized something most people never understand. Information is not transformation. A person can consume endless advice and still remain mentally unchanged if they never sit still long enough to truly process it. Because deep thinking is where real change happens. Not during stimulation. During reflection. That's why some of the wisest people you'll ever meet often move slower mentally. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they think carefully. They allow thoughts to unfold completely. They don't rush to react emotionally every few seconds. Meanwhile, overstimulated minds struggle to stay with one thought long enough to understand themselves clearly. It's like trying to see your reflection in water that never stops moving. A restless mind cannot reflect deeply. And without reflection, people slowly lose connection with themselves. That's why so many people today secretly feel lost, even though they consume more information than any generation before them. Because information alone does not create clarity. Silence does. Reflection does. Stillness does. But stillness has become uncomfortable for modern minds. One night, I remember driving home without music playing in the car because my phone battery had died earlier that day. At first, the silence felt strange, almost irritating. My brain kept searching for stimulation automatically, something to fill the space. And then, after about 20 minutes, something unexpected happened. My mind slowed down. Really slowed down. Thoughts I'd been unconsciously avoiding for weeks suddenly started surfacing. Questions about where my life was heading. Emotions I kept burying under constant distraction. Things I genuinely needed to confront. And I realized something terrifying in that moment. Most people are never alone with their real thoughts anymore. The second silence appears, they escape it. They grab their phone, turn on music, open another app, anything to avoid stillness. But when a human being avoids silence long enough, they eventually stop hearing themselves clearly altogether. That's why modern life feels emotionally confusing for so many people. Their inner voice becomes weaker than the external noise surrounding them. And when that happens, people become easier to influence. Because a person who cannot think deeply will eventually start thinking emotionally. Reacting emotionally. Living emotionally. That's why outrage spreads so easily online. Why trends change people so quickly. Why so many individuals constantly absorb the opinions, fears, anger, and emotional energy of strangers without questioning any of it deeply. A mind without reflection becomes vulnerable to manipulation. And maybe the darkest part of all is this. Some people haven't had an original thought in years. Only reactions to headlines, reactions to trends, reactions to algorithms, reactions to whatever captured their attention that day. But reaction is not awareness. Reaction is not wisdom. And reaction is definitely not freedom. Freedom requires the ability to pause, to question, to think independently, to sit with uncertainty without immediately escaping into distraction. That's becoming rare now. Very rare. Because the modern world rewards speed more than depth. Quick takes, quick entertainment, quick stimulation, quick emotional reactions. But deep thinking cannot survive in a rushed mind. It requires patience, presence, space, and most importantly, silence. That's why some of the most powerful moments in life happen away from noise. During long walks, late nights alone, quiet mornings before the world wakes up. Moments where the mind finally has enough space to breathe and reconnect with itself again. That's where clarity returns. That's where purpose becomes visible. That's where people finally hear the thoughts they've been drowning out for years. And maybe that's why so many people fear silence now, because silence doesn't just remove distraction, it reveals what distraction was hiding. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand why silence has become one of the rarest and most powerful things left in modern life. Chapter 4. Why silence terrifies modern people. A man finishes work, walks into his apartment, and immediately turns something on. Music, a podcast, the television, anything. The room is quiet for less than 10 seconds before noise fills it again. Not because he's enjoying it that much, because silence makes him uncomfortable, and most people never stop to question why. They assume they just like background noise. They think they're multitasking, staying entertained, staying informed. But if you pay close attention, something deeper is happening beneath all of it. A lot of people are no longer using noise for enjoyment. They're using it for escape. Escape from stress, escape from uncertainty, escape from loneliness, escape from themselves. That's why silence feels so heavy now. Because silence removes the distractions people use to avoid what's happening inside them. And when the noise disappears, unresolved thoughts suddenly become louder. A few years ago, someone I knew went through a difficult breakup. At first, he seemed fine. He still showed up to work, still joked around, still acted normal around friends. But one night we were driving somewhere together and I noticed something strange. The moment the music stopped playing in the car, he reached for his phone almost instantly. Not consciously, automatically. Scroll, tap, refresh. A few minutes later, he admitted something quietly while staring out the window. "I hate quiet lately." There was no drama in his voice when he said it, just honesty. And honestly, I think a lot of people understand that feeling more than they want to admit. Because silence has a way of exposing things. Distraction keeps hidden. Pain, regret, fear, loneliness. Questions people keep postponing. That's why overstimulation became so addictive in modern life. Not just because it entertains people, but because it protects them from confronting themselves deeply. As long as the noise continues, the inner world stays buried, but eventually that comes at a cost. Because a person who constantly escapes themselves slowly loses connection with who they really are. You can feel it happening in small moments. People walking down the street unable to exist without headphones. People checking their phones in elevators after 3 seconds of silence. People sitting with friends while mentally escaping into notifications. Even moments that used to feel peaceful now feel unbearable to overstimulated minds. And maybe the strangest part is this. Human beings once depended on silence to stay mentally healthy. Silence used to exist naturally in everyday life. Long walks without stimulation, sitting outside thinking, driving without constant input, waiting without entertainment, moments where the mind could breathe, process emotions, reflect and reset. Now almost every empty space gets filled immediately. And when the brain never experiences silence, it slowly forgets how to regulate itself without external stimulation. That's why so many people today feel emotionally exhausted, even when their lives look normal from the outside. Their nervous system never truly rests. Even relaxation became noisy. People watch shows while scrolling, eat while consuming content, listen to podcasts while answering texts. The mind is always processing something, always reacting, always absorbing. And eventually, inner peace starts feeling unfamiliar. One morning after months of feeling mentally overwhelmed, I decided to leave my phone at home and take a walk before sunrise. No music, no podcast, no distraction, just silence. At first it felt uncomfortable. My brain kept reaching for stimulation automatically. I kept thinking about checking messages that probably didn't matter. It was almost shocking how difficult simple silence had become. But after a while, something started changing. The world slowed down. I noticed the sound of birds for the first time in months. The cold air, my breathing, my own thoughts becoming clearer instead of scattered. And underneath all the mental noise I had been carrying, there was this strange feeling waiting quietly beneath it. Relief, real relief. Not stimulation, not escape, peace. That's when I realized something important. Most people are not addicted to their phones. They're addicted to avoiding themselves. And modern life makes that avoidance incredibly easy. The second discomfort appears, distraction becomes available instantly. No waiting, no reflection, no silence necessary, which means people rarely develop emotional endurance anymore. The ability to sit with discomfort without escaping it. The ability to process emotions instead of numbing them. The ability to face uncertainty without immediately drowning it in stimulation. And without emotional endurance, people become fragile mentally. Small discomforts feel overwhelming. Stillness feels threatening. Loneliness feels unbearable, because their mind never learned how to remain calm without constant external input. That's why silence became a superpower in modern life. Not because silence itself is magical, but because very few people can tolerate it anymore. A person who can sit quietly with their thoughts without needing constant stimulation becomes different, clearer, more emotionally stable, more self-aware, less reactive, less controllable. Because silence strengthens something distraction weakens, your relationship with yourself. And once that relationship becomes strong again, everything changes. Your decisions become more intentional. Your emotions become less chaotic. Your mind becomes less dependent on constant noise. You stop needing stimulation every second just to feel okay. That's why some of the calmest people you'll ever meet often protect silence aggressively. They understand something modern culture forgot. Clarity grows in quiet places, not noisy ones. And maybe that's why so many people secretly avoid silence now. Because silence forces honesty. Honesty about your habits, your relationships, your emotional state, your direction in life. And honesty can feel terrifying when distraction is no longer there to protect you from it. But it's also where transformation begins. Because the moment you stop running from silence, you finally give yourself a chance to hear who you become underneath all the noise. And in the next chapter, you're going to learn how people rebuild focus in a world designed to destroy it. Chapter 5. Rebuilding Focus in a Broken World. One afternoon, a man sat down at his desk, determined to focus for 1 hour. Just 1 hour. No distractions, no scrolling, no switching tabs. Just deep work. 5 minutes later, he picked up his phone without thinking. Not because it rang, not because someone texted him. His hand moved automatically, almost like his brain needed stimulation before discomfort could even fully appear. He unlocked the screen, checked nothing important, put it back down, and suddenly realized something unsettling. He was no longer fully in control of his own attention. That moment hits harder than most people expect when it finally happens to them. Because deep down, almost everyone believes they can focus whenever they choose to. They think distraction is optional, until they try to sit still, until they try to concentrate deeply again, until they discover how restless their mind has quietly become. That's the hidden damage of constant overstimulation. It doesn't just weaken attention, it trains the brain to resist depth itself. And once that happens, focus starts feeling unnatural, painful even. People sit down to work and suddenly feel the urge to check notifications, clean the room, open another tab, refresh something. Anything except remain fully present with one task long enough to enter deep concentration. At first, many people interpret this as laziness, but often it's withdrawal from stimulation. Because a distracted brain becomes addicted to novelty, tiny emotional spikes, constant input, fast-moving information. And when those things disappear, the nervous system reacts almost immediately. Restlessness, impatience, mental resistance. That's why rebuilding focus feels uncomfortable in the beginning. You're not just building discipline, you're retraining a brain that adapted to interruption. A friend of mine experienced this in a way that changed his entire life. He used to spend nearly every free moment consuming something. Videos while eating, podcasts while driving, social media before bed, music while working. Constant input from morning until sleep. Then one day he decided to try something simple. He would sit at a table for 30 minutes every morning and work on one important task with his phone in another room. That's it. No complicated system, no productivity hacks, just uninterrupted focus. The first few days felt horrible. His brain kept searching for stimulation every few minutes. He described it like an itch inside his mind, a constant urge to escape the discomfort of sustained attention. But after 2 weeks, something surprising happened. His thoughts started slowing down, not in a bad way, in a clear way. He became calmer during conversations, less emotionally reactive, more patient, more present. And for the first time in years, he could actually finish difficult tasks without mentally collapsing halfway through them. That's when he realized focus does something most people never talk about. It rebuilds self-trust. Because every time you stay focused despite discomfort, you prove to yourself that your attention still belongs to you. And that changes a person psychologically. A distracted mind starts feeling powerless after a while. It reacts automatically, impulsively, emotionally. But a focused mind feels intentional, stable, directed. That's why focus is becoming one of the rarest forms of power in modern life. Not intelligence, not talent. Focus. Because intelligence means very little in a world where most people can't sustain attention long enough to use it properly. Look around carefully and you'll notice something strange. Many people are overwhelmed not because they have too much work, but because their attention is constantly fragmented. They spend entire days mentally switching between dozens of things without fully entering depth anywhere. And fragmentation drains energy faster than effort itself. That's why someone can sit at a desk for 8 hours and still feel mentally exhausted while accomplishing almost nothing meaningful. Their brain never settled deeply enough to enter flow. Everything stayed shallow, interrupted, scattered. A fragmented mind creates a fragmented life. And maybe that's why so many people secretly feel stuck right now. Their energy leaks into endless distractions before it can be invested into anything meaningful long enough to grow. Relationships need attention. Goals need attention. Health needs attention. Peace needs attention. And whatever receives your consistent attention eventually shapes your future. That's why rebuilding focus is not just about productivity, it's about identity. Every moment of deep focus reinforces a powerful message internally. I can direct my own mind. That's a very different feeling from compulsively reacting to whatever steals your attention next. A few months ago, I noticed something while sitting in a cafe early in the morning. Almost everyone around me kept touching their phones every few minutes. Some unlocked them without even checking anything specific. It looked unconscious, automatic. Then I noticed one man sitting quietly near the window reading a book without touching his phone once for nearly an hour. And honestly, he looked different, calmer, more grounded, more present. Not because reading books magically makes someone superior, but because uninterrupted attention has become rare enough to feel almost unusual now. That's the paradox of modern life. The people who can focus deeply often appear extraordinary simply because everyone else became addicted to distraction. And the beautiful part is this: focus can be rebuilt faster than most people think, not overnight, but gradually. One uninterrupted conversation, one quiet morning, one deep work session, one walk without stimulation, one moment of resisting the impulse to escape boredom immediately. Small moments, repeated consistently. That's how attention heals. Not through intensity, through repetition, because every time you resist distraction, you strengthen something invisible inside yourself: your ability to remain present, your emotional endurance, your mental clarity. And slowly, the world starts feeling different again. Food tastes better when you're actually present while eating. Conversations become deeper when your attention isn't divided. Books become immersive again. Silence becomes peaceful instead of uncomfortable. Life itself starts feeling more alive. That's the real reward of rebuilding focus, not becoming more productive, becoming more present. And maybe that's what people are truly starving for now. Not more stimulation, not more information. Presence, real presence. Because a person who fully owns their attention eventually begins owning their life again. And in the next chapter, you're going to see why protecting your mind from digital manipulation may become one of the most important survival skills of the modern world. Chapter 6. Escape the digital manipulation. A woman wakes up tired, reaches for her phone, and before she even gets out of bed, she's already angry. Not because anything happened to her personally, but because within the first 5 minutes of waking up, she consumed arguments, outrage, fear, bad news, comparison, and emotional chaos from people she has never met. And the frightening part is this: she thinks she's simply staying informed. That's how modern manipulation works now. Quietly, constantly, emotionally. Most people imagine manipulation as something obvious: propaganda, brainwashing, lies. But modern manipulation is far more subtle than that. It doesn't force people to think a certain way overnight. It slowly shapes their emotional state every single day. One notification at a time, one headline at a time, one algorithmic recommendation at a time, until eventually people stop realizing how much of their inner world is being influenced by what they consume constantly. Because what enters your mind repeatedly does not stay neutral, it affects your emotions, your attention, your nervous system, your perception of reality itself. That's why two people can live in the exact same world while experiencing completely different emotional realities, depending on what they feed their minds daily. One person constantly consumes outrage and fear. Another protects their attention carefully. Over time, they become psychologically different human beings. A few years ago, one of my relatives developed a habit of watching negative news almost non-stop. Every morning started with bad headlines. Every evening ended with political outrage videos. Every conversation slowly became more fearful, angry, and emotionally tense. At first, nobody noticed how deeply it was affecting him. But over time, something changed. He became more anxious, more reactive, more pessimistic. He started seeing danger everywhere, distrusting everyone, carrying emotional heaviness even during ordinary moments that used to feel peaceful. And the strange part was, his actual life had not become dramatically worse. His mental environment had. That's when I realized something most people completely underestimate. Your mind slowly becomes the emotional climate you live inside every day. If you constantly consume fear, your nervous system starts expecting danger. If you constantly consume outrage, your mind becomes emotionally reactive. If you constantly consume comparison, peace becomes difficult to maintain. And social media understands this perfectly. Why? Because emotional reactions keep people engaged longer. Fear spreads fast. Anger spreads fast. Comparison spreads fast. Calm does not. Peaceful people usually don't scroll endlessly. Emotionally triggered people do. That's why algorithms reward intensity. Not clarity, not wisdom, intensity. And once you notice this pattern clearly, the internet starts looking very different. You begin realizing most platforms are not designed to protect your peace of mind. They are designed to capture and hold your attention for as long as possible, which means your emotional state becomes profitable. Think about how strange that is. The more distracted, reactive, outraged, insecure, or emotionally overstimulated people become, the more money many platforms make from their attention. That's why protecting your mind has become a survival skill now. Not just a wellness habit, a survival skill. Because if you don't consciously choose what enters your mind, the algorithm will choose for you. And algorithms do not care about your peace. They care about engagement. A friend once told me something after taking a month-long break from social media that completely changed how I viewed digital consumption. He said, "I didn't realize how angry I'd become until I stepped away from what was feeding it every day." That sentence stayed with me, because most people think their emotions belong entirely to them. But many emotions are amplified constantly by what people consume repeatedly without questioning it. Fearful content creates fearful minds. Chaotic content creates chaotic minds. Superficial content creates shallow attention. And slowly people stop noticing how emotionally manipulated they've become because everybody around them is living the same way too. That's the dangerous part. When overstimulation becomes cultural, dysfunction starts feeling normal. People normalize anxiety, normalize distraction, normalize emotional exhaustion, normalize checking their phone hundreds of times a day, normalize feeling mentally drained all the time. But normal does not mean healthy. A lot of modern habits are psychologically destructive while appearing socially acceptable. And one of the biggest lies people believe today is this: watching something doesn't affect me. But it does. Everything affects you. Every environment shapes you. Every repeated input trains your mind in some direction. That's why protecting your attention changes your emotional life so dramatically. The moment you become selective about what enters your mind, your inner world starts becoming quieter, cleaner, calmer. You think more clearly, react less impulsively, feel less emotionally overwhelmed. And perhaps most importantly, you begin hearing your own thoughts again instead of constantly absorbing everyone else's. That's real freedom. Not disconnecting from the world completely, but regaining control over what deserves access to your mind. A while ago, I started removing certain things from my digital environment. Accounts that constantly spread outrage, endless negative news, content designed purely to trigger comparison and insecurity. At first it felt small, almost insignificant, but within weeks something changed emotionally. My thoughts became less chaotic. My attention became steadier. Even ordinary days started feeling lighter mentally, and I realized something important. Peace is not only created by what you add to your life, it's also created by what you stop feeding your mind every day. That's why mentally strong people become extremely careful about what they consume consistently. Not because they're avoiding reality, because they understand attention is fragile, and once your mind becomes overloaded with noise, fear, outrage, and endless stimulation, clarity disappears quickly. That's the hidden cost of digital manipulation. It doesn't just steal time, it slowly shapes identity, because whatever repeatedly controls your attention eventually influences the person you become. And maybe the most dangerous thing in modern life is not technology itself, but unconscious consumption. Living without realizing your mind is being shaped every single day by forces designed to keep you distracted, emotional, and endlessly engaged. But once you become aware of that, something powerful happens. You stop consuming automatically. You start choosing intentionally. And in the next chapter, you're going to discover what happens when a person finally becomes mentally independent in a world addicted to noise. Chapter 7. Become mentally independent. A man posts a photo online and checks his phone 6 times within the next 10 minutes. Not because he received important news. Because he wants to see who reacted to him, who liked it, who noticed him, who validated him. And even though almost nobody talks about it honestly, millions of people now live inside this emotional loop every single day. Post, check, refresh, wait for validation, repeat. At first it feels harmless, human even. Everybody wants connection, everybody wants to feel seen. But slowly, without realizing it, many people stop living from their own internal sense of self and start living through external reactions instead. And that changes a person more than they think. Because the more your emotional state depends on outside validation, the less mentally independent you become. Your mood starts shifting based on responses. Your confidence rises and falls depending on attention. Your identity becomes shaped by perception instead of truth. And eventually, you stop asking yourself one important question: what do I actually think? Because modern life constantly pressures people to absorb the emotional atmosphere around them instead of developing inner clarity for themselves. You can see it everywhere now. People adopting opinions instantly because they're trending. People becoming emotionally reactive because everyone around them is angry. People changing themselves constantly to fit whatever gets approval. And maybe the strangest part is this. Many people no longer know where their real personality ends and outside influence begins. A few years ago, I knew someone who constantly posted online. Every meal, every trip, every thought, every achievement. At first, it looked like confidence, but over time, something underneath it became obvious. He wasn't sharing moments anymore. He was searching for reassurance. And whenever engagement dropped, his mood changed instantly. He became anxious, irritated, restless, like silence itself was starting to feel threatening. One night we were talking and he admitted something quietly that most people would never say out loud. I don't even know if I enjoy things anymore unless other people see them. That sentence hit hard because it revealed something modern culture rarely acknowledges. A lot of people are no longer experiencing life directly. They're experiencing it through performance, through validation, through perception. And when that happens long enough, people slowly lose connection with their authentic self. They stop asking, what feels meaningful to me, and start asking, what gets attention? That shift changes everything. Because attention is addictive, validation is addictive. And once someone becomes emotionally dependent on outside approval, independent thinking becomes difficult. Why? Because truth becomes less important than acceptance. That's why mentally independent people often look unusual in modern society. They move differently, slower emotionally, less reactive, less desperate for attention. They're capable of sitting with their own thoughts without immediately needing agreement from the world. That kind of inner stability has become rare, very rare. A while ago, I decided to stop posting online for a period of time. No updates, no sharing, no checking reactions constantly. At first it felt strange, almost uncomfortable. Like part of my brain kept expecting external feedback that never came. And that's when I noticed something unsettling. Silence reveals dependency. The moment outside validation disappeared, I became aware of how conditioned modern people are to seek constant emotional reinforcement. Likes, messages, attention, approval. Tiny signals telling them they matter. But here's the twist most people never see. The more desperately someone needs outside validation, the weaker their relationship becomes with themselves. Because self-worth built on external attention is fragile by nature, it changes constantly. One day people praise you, the next day they ignore you. And if your identity depends on those reactions, your emotional state becomes unstable too. That's why mentally independent people protect solitude carefully. Not because they hate people, because solitude helps them hear themselves clearly again. Without noise, without pressure, without performance. That's where real self-awareness begins. Not in crowds, not in algorithms, in quiet honesty. One of the calmest people I've ever met had a habit that seemed almost boring at first. Every morning before touching his phone, he would sit alone with coffee for 20 minutes in complete silence. No music, no scrolling, no stimulation. One morning I asked him why. He smiled and said something simple that stayed with me for years. If I don't spend time hearing my own thoughts first, the world starts thinking for me. That sentence contains more wisdom than most people realize. Because modern life constantly floods the mind with external opinions, emotional energy, trends, outrage, and noise. And if a person never creates space to think independently, they slowly become shaped by whatever surrounds them most. That's why mental independence is one of the greatest forms of freedom left now. The ability to think clearly without emotional pressure, the ability to disagree without fear, the ability to exist without constantly needing validation from strangers, the ability to enjoy life without turning every moment into performance. That kind of inner stability changes a person deeply. They become calmer, less reactive, more intentional, less controllable. Because once your self-worth stops depending on constant outside approval, the world loses a surprising amount of power over you. And maybe that's why mentally independent people often appear peaceful in ways others struggle to understand. Their mind no longer reacts to every emotional wave surrounding them. They choose what deserves their energy carefully. They think before reacting. They protect their attention intentionally. And most importantly, they stop abandoning themselves just to feel accepted temporarily. That's real confidence, not loudness, not performance, not attention. Clarity. Because a person who truly knows themselves no longer needs constant reassurance from the outside world to feel grounded internally. And the beautiful part is this: mental independence can be rebuilt, slowly, quietly. Every time you choose reflection over reaction, every time you sit with your own thoughts honestly, every time you stop chasing validation long enough to reconnect with yourself again. That's how people reclaim their mind. And in the final chapter, you're going to see why focused, mentally independent people may become the most powerful individuals in the future. Chapter 8. Focused people will dominate the future. A few years ago, a friend of mine disappeared quietly. Not literally. He still answered messages sometimes, still showed up occasionally, but slowly, almost without announcement, he stepped away from the constant noise most people live inside every day. He stopped posting constantly, stopped arguing online, stopped consuming endless content late at night, stopped reacting to every trend, every outrage cycle, every emotional storm the internet created that week. At first, people thought something was wrong with him. Some assumed he became antisocial. Others joked that he vanished. But while everyone else stayed trapped in endless distraction, something strange started happening to his life. He became calmer, healthier, more focused, more disciplined. He started building things quietly while other people stayed busy reacting to noise all day. And after about a year, he looked completely different. Not physically, mentally. Like somebody who had finally reclaimed ownership over his own mind. That's when I realized something important. The people who learn to protect their attention today will become extremely powerful tomorrow. Because we are entering a world where focus is becoming rare. Very rare. Most people now live in a permanent state of mental fragmentation. Their attention is divided constantly. Their emotions are reactive. Their thoughts are scattered across hundreds of inputs every single day, and a distracted mind struggles to build anything meaningful for long. Not because distracted people lack intelligence, but because great things require sustained attention. Strong relationships require attention. Mastery requires attention. Purpose requires attention. Inner peace requires attention. And in a world designed to destroy attention, the people who protect it gain an enormous advantage over everyone else. That's the paradox of modern life. The calmer someone becomes internally, the more powerful they often become externally. Because while everybody else reacts impulsively, focused people remain clear. While everybody else chases stimulation, focused people build patiently. While everybody else consumes endlessly, focused people create. And over time, those differences compound quietly. A man who can sit alone and work deeply for 3 uninterrupted hours now has a massive advantage over people who lose focus every 5 minutes. A person who can think independently has a massive advantage over people emotionally controlled by trends. A person who protects their peace has a massive advantage over people constantly overwhelmed by noise. These things may seem small day to day, but over years they completely change the direction of a life. That's why attention is no longer just about productivity. It's about power, real power. The ability to direct your energy intentionally instead of having it stolen constantly by distractions that ultimately leave you empty. And maybe the saddest part is that most people still don't realize what's happening to them. They think constant exhaustion is normal, constant distraction is normal, constant mental noise is normal, but it isn't. Human beings were never designed to absorb this much stimulation without consequences. And eventually, the people who continue living reactively will feel increasingly lost, anxious, distracted, and emotionally drained, while the rare few who reclaim their focus begin separating themselves quietly from the chaos around them. Not through luck, not through talent, through attention. That's why some of the most dangerous people in the future will not be the loudest people, they will be the clearest thinkers. The people capable of sustained focus in a distracted culture, the people capable of remaining calm while others panic, the people capable of protecting their attention while everyone else gives theirs away freely. A while ago, I sat in an airport, watching hundreds of people waiting for flights. Almost every person around me was staring into a screen, scrolling, tapping, refreshing constantly. Nobody looked present. The room was full of stimulation, yet emotionally empty at the same time. Then I noticed an older man sitting quietly near the window doing absolutely nothing. No phone, no headphones, no distractions. Just sitting peacefully, watching planes move across the runway. And strangely enough, he looked more alive than everyone else in the room. More present, more grounded, like his mind still belonged to him. That image stayed with me because it revealed something modern culture forgot. A person does not become powerful by consuming more. They become powerful by becoming harder to distract. That's the real shift. Because the future will reward people who can maintain clarity in chaos. Think deeply. Resist emotional manipulation. Delay gratification. Protect their energy. Remain present. Most people underestimate how life-changing those abilities become over time, because modern culture celebrates speed more than depth. But depth always wins, eventually. A focused person learns faster, builds better, loves deeper, thinks clearer, lives calmer. And perhaps most importantly, they stop feeling like life is happening to them constantly. They begin directing it intentionally. That's freedom, real freedom, not unlimited stimulation, not endless entertainment. Ownership over your own mind. Because once your attention belongs to you again, something powerful begins happening internally. You stop reacting to every emotional wave. You stop needing constant noise. You stop escaping yourself. You become comfortable with silence, comfortable with focus, comfortable with your own thoughts. And in a world addicted to distraction, that becomes almost revolutionary. Maybe that's why truly focused people often feel different when you're around them. Their energy feels calmer, more grounded, less chaotic. Because their nervous system is no longer constantly pulled apart by endless stimulation. They're fully present, and presence has become rare enough to feel powerful now. The frightening truth is that many people will spend their entire lives overstimulated, emotionally reactive, and mentally exhausted without ever realizing they slowly lost control over their attention. But you don't have to become one of them, because the moment you become aware of the game, you stop being controlled by it unconsciously. You start choosing differently, protecting your mind differently, living differently. And slowly, your life begins changing from the inside out. One focused moment at a time, one intentional decision at a time, one protected piece of attention at a time. Because in the end, your attention becomes your life. Whatever owns your attention eventually shapes who you become. And maybe the rarest thing left in the modern world is a person who can still sit quietly, think clearly, and remain fully present in their own life. That person becomes dangerous. Because while the world loses itself in endless distraction, they finally found themselves again. At the beginning of this audiobook, we talked about something most people rarely notice until it's already affecting their entire life: the slow theft of attention. Not through force, not through one dramatic moment, but quietly. One notification at a time, one distraction at a time, one unconscious habit at a time. And over the last hour, you've seen what that really costs a person. Not just productivity, not just focus, but clarity, peace, presence, connection with yourself. Because the truth is, your attention shapes your reality more than almost anything else. What you consistently focus on becomes your emotional state, your habits, your priorities, and eventually your identity. That's why this was never just a conversation about phones or social media. It was a conversation about ownership. Ownership over your mind, ownership over your energy, ownership over your life. And maybe the biggest realization of all is this: most people are not intentionally choosing the direction of their attention anymore. They are reacting automatically to whatever captures it first. Endless stimulation, endless noise, endless emotional input pulling their mind further away from stillness, clarity, and presence. But now you see it differently. You understand why silence became uncomfortable, why focus became difficult, why overstimulation slowly disconnects people from themselves. And most importantly, you understand that your mind can be rebuilt. That matters more than you think. Because once someone becomes aware of the patterns controlling them, change becomes possible again. Not overnight, not perfectly, but gradually. One intentional decision at a time. Maybe tomorrow morning. Instead of reaching for your phone immediately, you sit quietly for a few minutes first. Maybe you take a walk without stimulation. Maybe you protect one uninterrupted hour to focus deeply on something meaningful. Maybe you begin paying attention to what your mind consumes every day instead of allowing algorithms to decide for you automatically. Small changes, quiet changes. But those small moments slowly rebuild something modern life has been taking away from people for years: their ability to be fully present. And presence changes everything. Food tastes better when your mind is actually there. Conversations become deeper. Life slows down enough to feel meaningful again. You stop rushing through your days unconsciously and start experiencing them intentionally. That's the real goal, not becoming perfect, not escaping technology forever, but learning how to live without constantly abandoning yourself to distraction. Because the people who protect their attention in this world become different, calmer, clearer, stronger emotionally, harder to manipulate, harder to control, and maybe one day that ability will become one of the greatest advantages a person can have. So as this audiobook comes to an end, I want you to remember something simple. Your attention is valuable, your peace is valuable, your mind is valuable, and not everything deserves access to them. Protect them carefully. The world will continue competing for your attention every single day. Notifications will continue calling your name. Algorithms will continue trying to keep you distracted. Noise will always exist. But now you know something many people never realize. You do not have to give your mind away so easily. You can choose what deserves your focus. You can choose what kind of life you build, and slowly, one intentional moment at a time, you can become someone who is fully present again. Thank you for spending this time here with me, truly. And if this audiobook helped you see your life, your habits, or your mind differently in any way, then carry these lessons into your daily life. Don't just listen to them, practice them. Because awareness without action changes nothing. Take care of your mind, protect your attention, and I'll see you in the next video.